Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
All those who are scoring 90 plus marks in the prelims examination have a very strong chance to clear the prelims. Now, you should start preparing for the coming mains examination without any confusion. Rao's IAS has launched General Studies Mains Test Series and Quality Improvement Program for Mains 2020. The goals of the program are: first, revision of the most important themes from the perspective of mains examination. For this, there will be Mains Compass, which are subject-wise compilations, and Quality Improvement Program classroom discussions. Second, fine-tuning of answer writing approach through rigorous testing, sample answers, evaluation and personal mentorship from the teachers. Third, simulation of exam-like testing through tests which will help you understand the art and science of answer writing along with honing your time management skills. The new batch is starting from 16th of October, so enroll now and better your chances to clear the mains examination. The link to enroll for this program and its detail are given in the description of the video.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 15th of October 2020. The news articles to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. In our weekly series of mains question assignment from the DNS, the question for this week here is: Japan's supply chain resilience initiative is a healthy step forward in India-Japan relationship. Analyze. The answer to this particular question has to be written in 250 words. Now this particular question has been created from the Daily News Simplified video of 30th of August 2020 from the discussion titled as Supply Chain Resilience Initiative FAQ. You may watch the discussion before writing the answer. In the description of the video, there is a link for the question assignment where you can participate in the discussion on the Rao's IAS eLearn platform. The link to the question has been uploaded as the mains weekly question. Now, before you go to the analysis of today's DNS, I would want you to test yourself through these questions. The answers to these questions have been given at the end of the video before the question for the day. Now the next article appears on page number 7 and is titled as The RBI Tunes into the Economy. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy. This article is also important because in both previous year prelims as well as mains, questions have been asked with respect to the inflation targeting adopted by the Reserve Bank of India. Accordingly, a mains question for the practice from this particular topic could be: do you think that the inflation targeting adopted by the RBI has been able to fulfill its stated objective? Give arguments in support of your answer. Now, before understanding the various facets of this particular article, let us first look into its background. As you all must be aware, the Reserve Bank of India has adopted the inflation targeting in the year 2015. As per this inflation targeting, the RBI is ideally required to maintain a rate of inflation at 4%. This could either increase or decrease by plus or minus 2%. So overall, the rate of inflation in India has to be maintained between 2 to 6%. Now this inflation targeting has been adopted on the premise that both high rate of inflation as well as zero or the negative rate of inflation adversely affect the economy. That means the rate of inflation in an economy should neither be too high, it should not be zero, and it should not be too low as well. Ideally, there should be a moderate rate of inflation within an economy. Such moderate rate of inflation in turn promotes growth and economic development. Let us understand why is this so. Now let's say an economy is facing very high rate of inflation. Let's say the rate of inflation is above 6%. In that case, obviously there would be a drastic increase in the prices of most of the goods and services, and these goods and services would be unaffordable for the poor people. So inflation hurts the poor people the most. At the same time, as the rate of inflation increases, there would be a decrease in the purchasing power. For example, let's say a price of an apple was rupees 10 and now because of inflation it has increased to rupees 20. Earlier with rupees 20 you are able to buy 2 apples, but now with rupees 20 you are able to buy only 1 apple. So as the rate of inflation increases, the purchasing power of people reduces. Further, as the rate of inflation increases, people would be required to spend more amount of money on purchasing the same basket of goods and services. This would lead to decrease in the savings. People would have less amount of money to undertake expenditure. So this will translate into lower demand. The lower demand will in turn reduce the investment by the private sector companies, leading to the decrease in the employment or the job creation. And this in turn leads to a overall decrease in the production of goods and services within an economy, leading to a decline in the GDP growth rate. Apart from that, as the prices of goods and services within the country increases, when these goods and services are exported to other countries, they would be costly. Thus, this would lead to decrease in the exports from a country. At the same time, the higher money supply in the economy on account of higher inflation would lead to increase in the imports. So increase in imports accompanied by decrease in exports would lead to an increase in the current account deficit. Apart from that, usually the higher rate of inflation, that is the higher money supply in the economy, is accompanied by a higher fiscal deficit. This has an effect on the macroeconomic stability of the Indian economy. The Indian economy would not be able to attract more amount of foreign investment. So in general, a very high rate of inflation adversely affects the economy. On the other hand, let's see as to what would happen if an economy faces zero or a negative rate of inflation. See, if the zero rate of inflation means that the prices of goods and services are not increasing. Negative rate of inflation would mean that the prices of goods and services are actually declining. For example, let's say the last year a price of pen was rupees 10. Now the price of pen has reduced to rupees 5. Now, if there is a consistent decline in the prices of goods and services, then obviously the private sector would not invest to increase the production of goods and services. So whenever there is a zero or a negative rate of inflation, there is no incentive on the manufacturers to increase their production. This would lead to decrease in the investment. As the investment rate reduces, this would lead to decrease in the job creation. And in the long run, this would also lead to a decrease in the production of goods and services, leading to a decline in the GDP growth rate. So as you can see here, both high rate of inflation as well as a negative rate of inflation or a zero rate of inflation in the long run lead to a decline in the GDP growth rate. So in that case, a question which arises is, what should be the rate of inflation in an economy? Ideally, the rate of inflation should be moderate in nature. And what is that moderate rate of inflation in India? This is ideally at 4%. Now the question is, how does this moderate rate of inflation benefits the economy? Now when we say the moderate rate of inflation is at 4%, this means that the demand for goods and services is slightly more than the supply of the goods and services. So when the demand is slightly higher than the supply of goods and services, then this would act as an incentive for the domestic manufacturers to undertake investment, create more amount of employment opportunities, increase the overall production of goods and services. Now all of these things the private sector is basically undertaking because they would want to supply their goods and services and match up to the demand. But what essentially happens is demand in this particular case is always one step ahead of the supply. That means always a moderate rate of inflation, ideally it should be maintained at 4%. So by the time the supply is matching up to the demand has increased by 4%. Once again, the private sector tries to increase their production of goods and services to match up to the demand, but by then, once again, the demand increases by 4%. So what is happening in this case is the supply of the goods and services is trying to match up to the demand, and in doing so, the overall production of goods and services is increasing, the investment rate is increasing, employment opportunities are being created, exports are increasing, and the overall GDP growth rate of an economy is increasing. And why is all of this thing happening? This is precisely happening because the demand as such is slightly more than the supply. That is, we have a moderate rate of inflation. So keeping in mind benefits associated with maintaining a moderate rate of inflation of 4%, the RBI has adopted the inflation targeting. But the question which arises is, has this inflation targeting benefited the Indian economy? Now, if you see the Indian economy prior to the year 2019-20, that is when it started facing the economic slowdown, the RBI was able to maintain a stable rate of inflation between 2 to 6 percentage. In fact, the rate of inflation was between 4 to 5 percentage, which was considered to be ideal. According to discussion which we had, ideally, maintaining this moderate rate of inflation should have led to the increase in the GDP growth rate. But what actually happened in the year 2019-20 and beyond? Now, in spite of maintaining a moderate rate of inflation, there was a slowdown in the Indian economy, which has continued even today as well. What does this show? This clearly shows that the economic growth in a particular country is not entirely dependent upon the ability of the central bank to maintain a moderate rate of inflation. This shows that even if the central bank is able to maintain a moderate rate of inflation, then there is no guarantee that an economy would have a higher economic growth rate. The GDP growth rate of a country is dependent upon a number of parameters, and one of them happens to be the moderate rate of inflation. Now, take for instance, prior to the year 2019-20, we were able to maintain the rate of inflation in the ideal targeted range of 4 to 5 percentage. But the problem was the banks in case of India had accumulated higher amount of NPS. So the higher NPS in turn translated into lower investment rate, lower job creation, and hence the economic slowdown. So in spite of maintaining a moderate rate of inflation, the Indian economy has been facing the economic slowdown. So this clearly shows that the inflation targeting which has been adopted by the RBI has not been useful enough to promote the economic growth and development. Similarly, recently if you look at the consumer price index inflation which is targeted by the MPC, this has increased to more than 7%. In spite of this, recently when the Monetary Policy Committee held its meeting, the MPC decided to keep the policy rates unchanged. Usually what happens is when the rate of inflation increases, the MPC decides to increase the policy rates. But now, in spite of the fact that the present rate of inflation is much above the 6% targeted rate of inflation, the MPC decided not to increase the policy rates. In this regard, this particular article here highlights that to a certain extent the RBI has realized the failure of the inflation targeting, and accordingly there is a need to have a relook at the inflation targeting adopted by the RBI. In this regard, what we'll do here is we'll understand the benefits of the inflation targeting, the problems associated with the inflation targeting, and what needs to be done in order to address these problems. As far as inflation targeting is concerned, as part of the inflation targeting, as we have discussed, the central bank of a country focuses only on maintaining the rate of inflation within a targeted range. This was first time adopted by the New Zealand, and later on it has been adopted by a large number of countries including India. In case of India, it has been adopted through the Monetary Policy Framework Agreement that has been signed between RBI and the government in the year 2015. So as discussed, the inflation targeting would be able to maintain a moderate rate of inflation within an economy and hence promote economic growth and development. Inflation targeting brings in more amount of clarity as to what would the central bank of a country do with the policy rates. For example, if the rate of inflation is beyond the mandated targeted range, then the investors would know that the central bank of a country would increase the policy rates. Similarly, the rate of inflation is negative or the zero, then the investors would know that the central bank of a country would reduce the policy rates in order to inject more amount of money supply. So the inflation targeting is associated with greater amount of transparency and predictability. Apart from that, inflation targeting matches the autonomy of the RBI with its accountability. Now, as per the Monetary Policy Framework Agreement, the RBI has been given the complete autonomy to decide on the monetary policy. The only condition is RBI should be able to maintain the rate of inflation between 2 to 6%. So there is autonomy. But at the same time, according to Monetary Policy Framework Agreement, if the RBI is not able to maintain the rate of inflation within the targeted range, then the RBI is required to submit in writing the reasons for its failure. So this autonomy of the RBI is matched with its accountability. Further, if you look at the countries such as UK, New Zealand, etc., which have adopted the inflation targeting has actually benefited these economies. However, there are a number of problems associated with the inflation targeting. First and foremost, this disregards the multifaceted role of the RBI. See, RBI as a central bank is required to play a multifaceted role. For example, it is required to control the exchange rate. It is required to carry out the regulation of the entire banking sector. Through its monetary policy, it is required to promote the GDP growth rate, as well as it needs to create more amount of jobs. But what happens in case of inflation targeting is the role of the RBI gets confined only to control of inflation, and all other important functions which are required to be carried out are usually overlooked. In fact, some of the critics have pointed out that excessive focus of the RBI on the inflation targeting has led to RBI's neglect of other important functions. For example, the regulation of the banking sector. So as you can see, in the recent years, there has been increase in the number of bank fraud cases. Usually it is believed that if we are able to maintain a moderate rate of inflation, apart from promoting GDP growth rate, this also leads to financial stability. However, this particular assumption was actually proved wrong during the global financial crisis of the year 2008. Now, if you look at the years preceding the global financial crisis, during those years, the entire world economy was able to maintain the stability in the prices. So, ideally, as per the assumption, this particular price stability should have led to the financial stability. However, in reality, in spite of having the price stability before 2008, we still had the global financial crisis, which goes on to shows that the price stability alone cannot lead to financial stability. Nextly, in case of India, as stated before, even though we have been able to maintain an ideal rate of inflation between 4 to 5%, the economy as such has still been facing a slowdown. Lastly, as far as inflation targeting is concerned, this can come in handy only if the inflation is taking place on account of demand side factors. But what happens if the inflation is on account of supply side factors? For example, inflation can take place on account of increase in the crude oil prices, poor monsoon, floods, etc. Now, whenever inflation takes place due to supply side factors, the role of the government is much more important than the RBI. Here, the government of India would be required to enhance the supply of these goods and services in order to reduce the inflation. So, RBI would have limited role to play as far as the supply side inflation is concerned. So, the question is, what should the RBI do in order to avoid these problems? Now, if you look at the inflation targeting which is adopted by the RBI is concerned, it is referred to as the pure inflation targeting. This is because here the RBI is concerned only with maintaining the rate of inflation within the targeted range. So here the RBI is not concerned with other important aspects such as the GDP growth rate, employment creation, and so on. So some of the economists have pointed out that this pure inflation targeting adopted by the RBI can instead be replaced by the flexible inflation targeting. So in case of flexible inflation targeting, the Reserve Bank of India would focus both on maintaining the rate of inflation within an ideal range of 2 to 6%, and it would also focus upon enhancing the GDP growth rate. And how can these two objectives be fulfilled? Now, according to some of the economists, if the RBI is able to maintain a rate of inflation between 2 to 6%, then the RBI has to give more amount of emphasis on promotion of GDP growth rate. On the other hand, if the rate of inflation is either below 2% or greater than 6%, that means if RBI is not being able to maintain inflation within the targeted range, then the RBI should not focus on enhancing GDP growth rate. Rather, it should try to control the rate of inflation within the targeted range. So as long as the rate of inflation is within the targeted range, the RBI would focus on the GDP growth rate. As soon as the rate of inflation is beyond the targeted range, the RBI would try to bring the inflation within the targeted range. By doing so, the RBI would be able to focus both upon maintaining the rate of inflation as well as promotion of GDP growth rate. Such kind of model proposed by some of the economists is referred to as the flexible inflation targeting. So this is what you have to know with respect to this particular article. Now this particular article appears on page number 6, that is the editorial page, and is titled as Phased Manufacturing Policy That Is Hardly Smart. See, recently the government of India had unveiled the production linked incentive scheme in order to boost the domestic manufacturing of the mobile phones and specified electronic components. So far, according to the government of India, 22 foreign companies such as Samsung, Foxconn, Wistron, Pegatron, etc. have filed application under the production linked incentive scheme. Prior to this particular scheme, the government of India was giving thrust to the phased manufacturing program in order to give boost to the electronics and mobiles manufacturing. In this regard, this particular article here discusses as to what extent the PLI scheme and the phased manufacturing program would be able to give a boost to the electronics and the mobile manufacturing. Accordingly, based upon a video analysis, a main question for your practice from this particular article could be: the higher import of electronic goods and mobile phones has had an adverse impact on the Indian economy. In this regard, do you think the phased manufacturing program and the production linked incentive scheme would be able to usher in self-reliance in electronics manufacturing? Give arguments in your support. Let us first look at the present status of the electronics manufacturing in India. The overall production of the electronic goods has increased from $30 billion in the year 2015 to $70 billion in the year 2018. The electronics industry contributes almost up to 2.3% to India's GDP. Over a period of time, India has emerged as the second largest producer of mobile phones after China. However, one of the biggest problems with respect to the electronics manufacturing is that presently there is huge demand-supply mismatch in the electronic goods. The overall import of the electronic goods into India has increased to almost up to $56 billion. The share of the electronic goods in our import basket was quite negligible in the year 2010, but by the end of this particular decade, that is by the end of 2020, the overall share of the electronic goods in our import basket has increased to almost up to 3.5%. Almost 70% of the electronic goods imported into India basically come from China. See, if you look at India, India has made a name for itself as far as the IT services is concerned. India has come to be called as the back office of the world. However, India has failed to replicate the same success as far as the electronics manufacturing is concerned. However, presently there is huge prospects before India in order to boost the electronics manufacturing and give a thrust to the Make in India. First and foremost, the labor cost in case of China has been increasing. So a large number of mobile manufacturing companies are trying to locate away from China into other countries. So India has a potential to attract these multinational companies to set up their bases in India and start manufacturing the mobile phones. Apart from that, the global multinational companies such as Samsung, Apple, etc., they have set up their production base in some of the countries across the world. So they have acted as a lead firms and established a global value chains. So this presents a potential for India to get integrated into the global value chains. So this in a way will be able to give a boost to the assemble in India. Doing so will enable India to become a net exporter of the electronic goods from being a net importer. So as you can see here, we can actually promote a export-led virtuous economic cycle in order to promote the GDP growth, wherein the increase in the overall exports will promote increased competition and innovation in the mobile ecosystem. This will create more number of jobs. We would be able to attract more number of foreign companies, and thus this will be able to give a boost to the GDP growth rate. Hence, in order to ensure self-reliance and to promote Atmanirbhar Bharat in electronics and mobile manufacturing, presently the government of India is implementing basically two schemes. The first scheme is the phased manufacturing program, which has been implemented since the year 2017. And similarly, recently the government of India has launched a production linked incentive scheme for boosting the mobile manufacturing. So in this regard, we'll understand the details about these two schemes and to what extent these two schemes have been able to give a boost to the mobile manufacturing in India. We'll also see as to what further steps need to be taken in order to ensure the self-reliance in the mobile manufacturing. The phase manufacturing program basically seeks to promote the indigenous manufacturing of the mobile handsets and its components. The components such as the battery pack, display panel, keypad, camera module, printed circuit board, and so on. See, presently in case of India, both the mobile handsets as well as its components are basically imported from other countries such as China. This is mainly on account of two factors. First and foremost, countries such as China gives huge amount of subsidies to its mobile manufacturers. On account of this, the production cost of both mobile handsets as well as its components in case of China is quite lower. Secondly, the customs duty on the entry of these goods into India is quite lower. So when these goods enter into India, these goods are considered to be much cheaper as compared to the Indian goods. That is why India ends up importing more number of mobile handsets as well as its components. So the question is, how do you address the growing import of electronic goods? One simple solution is we can increase the customs duty on the import of the finished handsets. Secondly, we can identify some components, let's say like battery pack, display panel, keypad, camera module, etc. And instead of importing these components, we would have to boost the domestic manufacturing. Once again, in order to boost the domestic manufacturing of these mobile components, we can increase the customs duty. However, the problem that could arise is if we suddenly increase the customs duty on all of these components, then it can cause a disruption to the domestic manufacturing companies. The domestic manufacturing companies may be in turn dependent upon the import of these components for the manufacture of the finished mobile handsets. So the domestic manufacturing industries needs to have certain amount of time so that they can start manufacturing the imported components on their own. So what we need to do is we need to increase the customs duty on these components in a phased manner. For example, initially to begin with, we can increase the customs duty on those mobile components that are considered to be less sophisticated and can be easily manufactured in case of India. Take for example the battery pack, and as we progress ahead, we can increase the customs duty on more sophisticated components. Say for example, after 4 to 5 years, we can increase the customs duty on printed circuit board. So here what we are doing is we are increasing the customs duty on the mobile components in a phased manner. This will give adequate amount of time for the domestic manufacturers to ramp up their production. This will not disrupt the domestic production entirely. So this is what basically the phase manufacturing program does. So the phase manufacturing program seeks to impose differential duties, that is a customs duty, in a phased manner on the mobile handsets as well as on its components. Now for example, as you can see in this particular table, initially under the phased manufacturing program, we started imposing the customs duty on those mobile components which we felt that we could easily manufacture in India. For example, we increased the customs duty on mobile charger, the battery pack, the wired handset, and so on. And as the time progressed, we started bringing more number of mobile components into the phase manufacturing program. We increased the customs duty. So this was basically done in order to boost the domestic manufacturing and reduce the import of the mobile components. So let us understand as to what extent the phase manufacturing program has been successful. So far as we have discussed, the phase manufacturing program is based upon the tariff-based production that we are offering to the domestic companies in order to boost the production of the mobile handsets and their components. So what has happened is, since its introduction, the local production of the mobile handsets has increased from 11 crore units in the year 2015-16 to 18 crore units in the year 2018. Apart from that, the share of the imported mobile handsets has also reduced since the introduction of this particular program. Now, in spite of these positives associated with the phase manufacturing program, there are a number of problems with respect to its implementation. See, as discussed before, under the phase manufacturing program, we decided to increase the customs duty on the mobile handsets as well as the mobile related components. So ideally, upon the introduction of the phase manufacturing program in the year 2016-17, since then, the import of both mobile handsets as well as the mobile related components into India, this should have got reduced. But as you can see in this particular graph here, even though the overall import of the mobile handsets into India has got reduced, the import of the mobile related components has actually increased exponentially. The total import of the mobile related components into India was somewhere around 47,000 crores in the year 2014-15, and now in the year 2018-19 it has increased to almost up to 1.10 lakh crore. So there is an almost an increase of 134 percentage. What does this show? This clearly shows that in spite of increasing the customs duty on various mobile related components, its import into India has actually not got reduced. And why is that? This is so because the companies who are exporting these mobile related components are basically based in countries such as China, and these companies get huge amount of subsidies. So the subsidies in turn enable these companies to sell their mobile related components at much lower cost. So even if we apply the higher customs duty on these mobile components, when these mobile components enter into India, they are much cheaper as compared to the Indian components. Secondly, as you can see in this particular table, we wanted to increase the ambit of the mobile components under the phase manufacturing program. But as this particular table shows here, the ones in the green color shows that this particular initiative of the government of India has been successful. However, if you look at the other components such as the wire handset, keypad, USB cable, camera module, connectors, etc., in these components we have not been able to achieve much amount of success because of the entry of the cheaper goods from the other countries. So this clearly shows that the phase manufacturing program has failed to take off, particularly with respect to the domestic manufacturing of the mobile components. There has been an increase in the import of the mobile related components by almost 130 percentage. And if you look at the total amount of value addition that is presently taking place, in spite of the introduction of the phase manufacturing program, it is quite lower at around 10 percentage. Hence, in order to address the various flaws with respect to phase manufacturing program, recently the government of India has introduced a new initiative known as the Production Linked Incentive Scheme. The Production Linked Incentive Scheme basically seeks to promote the domestic manufacturing of the mobile phones that cost more than rupees 15,000, as well as certain specified electronic components. Under this particular scheme, the mobile manufacturers will be given an incentive between 4 to 6 percentage on their incremental sales over the base year of 2019-20. For example, let's say we have a mobile manufacturing company A. In the year 2019-20, this particular company has sold mobile phones worth say rupees 100 in this particular case. Next year, that is in the year 2020-2021, this company has sold mobile phones worth say rupees 200. So for this particular company, there has been increment in the overall sale of the mobile phones by rupees 100. So this company would be paid a financial incentive which would range from 4 to 6 percentage. So here this company could be paid a money ranging from rupees 4 to rupees 6 for enhancing its overall production of the mobile phones. The companies would be provided with the incentive for 5 years, and only those companies are eligible who would be able to cross the threshold both in terms of incremental sale of goods as well as incremental investment over the base year. So if a particular company is not being able to cross the threshold either in terms of incremental sale of goods or incremental investment, then such a company would not be eligible to get the benefit under the production linked incentive scheme. As to what is the threshold that a company needs to cross in order to get the benefits under this particular scheme, this is not important from the perspective of the prelims examination. See, one of the most positive development has been that almost 22 companies have filed application to get incentives under the PLI. Some of the global multinational companies have also filed. For example, let's say the Samsung, the global multinational companies who are considered to be the contract manufacturers of Apple iPhones, that is those companies who provide critical components to Apple iPhone, such as Foxconn, Wistron, Pegatron, etc. Even these companies have filed for the application under the PLI. Now, the article here has highlighted a number of problems with respect to the production linked incentive scheme. First and foremost, the article has highlighted that the amount of incentive which we are giving to the mobile manufacturing companies under this particular scheme is quite lower as compared to the benefits available to the companies, let's say, in China or the Vietnam. Hence, because of this, we may not be able to attract the global multinational companies to come and set up their production base in India. Now, for example, let's say, according to this particular article, if we have to manufacture a mobile phone worth rupees 100, now various countries across the world provide subsidies. Now, higher the subsidies, lower would be the production cost. Now, if you look at the production cost of this 100 rupees mobile phone, in case of China, this is hardly rupees 80. In case of Vietnam, this is hardly around rupees 89. Whereas in case of India, the production cost even after the implementation of the PLI is rupees 92. So this clearly shows that the amount of benefits that are available to the companies is quite lower. That is why the companies could continue to stay either in Vietnam or China and may not relocate to India. Secondly, if you look at our export competitiveness basically lies in the low value mobile phones. So India basically exports low value mobile phones and not the high end mobile phones. But if you look at the PLI scheme, under the PLI scheme, we are basically giving incentives to the mobile manufacturing company for the manufacture of the mobile phones whose value is greater than rupees 15,000. But our export competitiveness is not in terms of high-end mobile phones, but our export competitiveness is in terms of the low-value mobile phones. Now, the problem with respect to high-value mobile phones is that its demand across the world is not as high as the demand for the low value mobile phones. Thus, if we focus more on boosting the production of the high-end mobile phones and focus less on boosting the production of the low value mobile phones, then we may not be able to boost the exports from the Indian economy. Nextly, now when we give the financial incentives to the mobile manufacturing companies for enhancing production, these mobile manufacturing companies can actually import the mobile components from the other countries and manufacture the mobile phones. But this is not going to help India. To help India, what we need to do is we need to enhance the production of the mobile components within India. That is why under the production linked incentive scheme, we need to provide financial incentive even for the amount of value addition that a mobile manufacturing company does in India. So if you give the financial incentive for carrying out value addition, then the global multinational companies such as Samsung, Apple, etc., they will move their substantial amount of supply chain into India. This will give a boost to both make in India as well as assemble in India simultaneously. Nextly, if you have a look at the share of the different companies in India's domestic mobile market, in the year 2016-17, the domestic companies Micromax, Intex, Lava and Carbon, they together accounted for almost 45% of the domestic share. However, by the end of 2018, their share has got reduced from 45% to 19%. So presently, it is the Chinese brands such as MI, Vivo, Oppo, OnePlus, etc. that account for more than 50% of the domestic share in India. So this particular loss in the market share for the domestic manufacturing companies such as Micromax, etc. has led to their poor financial position. So concerns are raised that in spite of the incentives provided under this particular scheme, the domestic companies may not be able to compete with the global multinational companies such as Samsung. So the question is, what should be done in order to boost the electronics and mobile manufacturing? Obviously, first and foremost, as discussed before, the amount of incentives that we are giving to the mobile manufacturing companies, it is quite lower as compared to the incentives which they get in, say, China or Vietnam. So accordingly, we need to provide for the higher incentives. This incentive can be given in the form of both tax incentive as well as the production incentive. Secondly, we need to take an ecosystem approach wherein the multinational companies such as Samsung, Apple, etc. they need to be provided incentives not only for enhancing production but for enhancing value addition as well. So this in a way will enable India to get integrated into the global value chains. Even the domestic mobile manufacturing companies such as Micromax, Intex, etc. would have to focus upon more amount of value addition and should not be dependent upon the import of the mobile components from the other countries. And lastly, we would have to address various logistical challenges in order to boost the export of the mobile components as well as the mobile handsets from the Indian economy. Now, the next article appears on page number 10 and is titled as Jammu Kashmir Ladakh Women to Benefit from the Rural Scheme. This article shall be important from the perspective of polity and governance. Presently, the Government of India is implementing the National Rural Livelihood Mission, Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, for the poverty eradication and for enhancing the income level of the poor people. Earlier, this particular scheme was implemented in the erstwhile state of J&K as Ummeed. Under this particular scheme, the funds are allocated to the different states depending upon their percentage share of the BPL population throughout India. For example, if a particular state has 10% share of the BPL population throughout India, then such a state would get 10% of the funds. Accordingly, the share of the erstwhile state of J&K in the overall allocation of the NRLM was hardly around 1%. So because of the lower allocation, a large number of beneficiaries in the present day Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir as well as Ladakh, they were not able to get the benefit under this particular scheme. Accordingly, now the Government of India has decided to provide for a special package of rupees 520 crores, which in turn would be able to enhance the livelihood of the people in the rural areas. In this regard, let us understand some basic details about the National Rural Livelihood Mission from the perspective of the prelims examination. Now, prior to the National Rural Livelihood Mission, earlier the Government of India used to implement the Swarna Jayanti Gram Sarozgar Yojana. So the NRLM or the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana was launched as a centrally sponsored scheme in the year 2011 and it replaced the earlier Swarna Jayanti Gram Sarozgar Yojana. Let us look at the present strategy followed by the Government of India for the poverty eradication. Now, presently, the Government of India identifies the poor beneficiaries. Once these beneficiaries are identified, they are in turn supported by the Government of India through the financial support, hand-holding support, etc. And by providing such kind of support, it is expected that these poor people would be able to enhance their income levels. But there are a number of flaws with this present strategy. First and foremost, the beneficiaries as such are identified by the government itself. So this in turn leads to a large number of inclusion and the exclusion errors. Secondly, the government here supports an individual rather than a group of people coming together. See, normally it is observed that when the government is supporting an individual as part of the poverty alleviation program, usually such programs are not very successful. On the other hand, if the government is supporting a group of people who have convergence of interest, who come together in order to achieve their goal, then such kind of programs are considered to be much more successful. Take for instance, a group of people coming together to form the self-help groups or a group of people coming together to form the cooperatives. Then if the government is supporting such group of people, then the success of the government schemes and programs would be much more higher. We have already seen as to how the success of the Amul model has in turn led to the women empowerment and brought about rapid rural economic transformation. So if you want to ensure the success of the government scheme or a program, first and foremost, we have to ensure that the poor people are identified at the local level by the people themselves. Now, for example, if you want to identify as to who should be the beneficiaries for the public distribution system, now these beneficiaries should not be selected by the government. Rather, these beneficiaries have to be selected by the Gram Sabha itself. So this will in turn reduce the scope for the inclusion and the exclusion errors. Similarly, the government support as such should not be confined to a single individual. Rather, the government support as such should be available to a group of people who come together on account of convergence of an interest. For example, for bringing about the transformation of the agriculture sector, instead of providing the support to the individual farmers, the Government of India should instead support the development of the farmer producer organizations. See, whatever problems that we have discussed so far with respect to the poverty eradication programs, these problems can be cited by you while writing an answer in the UPSC mains examination. Coming back to Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, now the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana has basically been brought in in order to address the various flaws in the poverty eradication program. For example, instead of focusing on the individual beneficiaries, the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana focuses on the universal social mobilization, wherein one of the most important component of this particular program is to bring at least one adult female member from each and every identified rural household into the ambit of the self-help groups. So rather than focusing on the individual beneficiaries, it focuses on the group of people who are considered to be poor, vulnerable, as well as socially marginalized. It provides for a participatory identification of the poor. It provides for the community funds. This is provided both in the form of the revolving fund as well as a community investment fund. Revolving fund can be considered as a fund that is provided to the self-help groups at a periodic intervals. Community investment fund can be considered as a one-time investment fund which is provided to the self-help groups. Now, for example, under the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, we have a sub-scheme of Ajivika Gramin Express Yojana, wherein the community investment fund which is provided to self-help groups can be used by them in order to operate the public transport services. It also focuses on financial inclusion, convergences with various government schemes, programs, as well as multiple government agencies. It also seeks to foster partnership with the non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, as well as the Panchayati Raj institutions. Some of the important sub-schemes under the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana include the Mahila Kisan Sashaktikaran Pariyojana. See, in the recent years, there has been growing feminization of Indian workforce, wherein more number of women are taking up agriculture due to the migration of the rural males to the urban areas. Approximately almost 33% of the farmers in case of the Indian agriculture are actually women. So the Mahila Kisan Sashaktikaran Pariyojana seeks to organize the women in the agriculture into self-help groups and to enhance their overall productivity. The Startup Village Entrepreneurship Program seeks to promote the startup enterprises in the rural areas. The Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Gramin Kaushalya Yojana seeks to provide the necessary skill set to the rural unemployed youths so that they can be gainfully employed. Next, we have the Rural Self-Employment Training Institutes, wherein we are encouraging the public sector banks to set up the training institutes in the rural areas. And through these training institutes, we are transforming the rural unemployed youths into the self-employed entrepreneurs. And lastly, we have the National Rural Economic Transformation Project, which is an externally aided project funded by the World Bank. The next article appears on page number 15 and is titled as Public Debt Ratio to Rise to 90% of GDP on account of COVID-19. If you look at the combined debt of the center and states, this is almost around 70% of India's GDP. This has remained stable since the year 1991. However, on account of COVID-19, two important developments have taken place. First and foremost, there is a decline in the tax revenue, and secondly, there is increase in the overall expenditure by the government of India. So on account of these two factors, according to a research carried out by the IMF, the combined debt of the center and states is set to increase from 70% to 90%. Now, this particular article related to public debt of India is quite important because, as you can see in prelims 2019, there was a direct question related to India's external debt. Accordingly, in UPSC prelims, we can expect question related to the debt status of the central government. So let us understand various facets related to the debt status of the central government. Firstly, what exactly is debt and how is it different from the fiscal deficit? See, when we say fiscal deficit, the fiscal deficit represents the total amount of borrowings of the government of India in a single year, whereas debt represents a total accumulated borrowings. Now, for example, let's say in the year 2017, the government has borrowed rupees 100. So for the year 2017, rupees 100 would be the fiscal deficit. On the other hand, let's say in the year 2018, the government has borrowed rupees 150. So for the year 2018, rupees 150 would be the fiscal deficit. However, if you want to calculate the debt, here the debt would be rupees 100 plus rupees 150 plus all the previous borrowings of the government of India, which it has so far not repaid back. So fiscal deficit represents a borrowing in a single year, whereas a debt represents a total accumulated borrowings. So if you want to understand the debt status of the central government, we would have to look at the total liabilities of the government, which in turn has two components, that is the public debt and the liabilities under the public account of India. As on year 2018-19, the total liabilities of the central government stood at 46.5% of India's GDP. See here, we are talking only about the liabilities of the central government and we are not taking into account the liabilities of the state government. And as you can see here, out of the total liabilities, the public debt accounts for 41% of the GDP, whereas the liabilities under the public account of India account for 5.5% of India's GDP. The public debt in turn comprises of two components, that is the internal debt and the external debt. As the name signifies here, if the government of India is borrowing within India, then we call it as the internal debt. On the other hand, if the government is borrowing outside India, then it is called as the external debt. So the internal debt here includes all the sources of the government's borrowing within the domestic territory. So here you must be aware that in order to borrow the money, usually the government goes for the issuance of the treasury bills as well as the dated securities. Apart from these two sources, the government of India also resorts to the issuance of the ways and means advances and the cash management bills. As far as these two sources are concerned, these two sources are basically used by the government of India whenever it has mismatches in the cash balances, which means whenever the government of India has temporary mismatches in its receipts and expenditure, then in order to bridge such kind of mismatches, the government can go for the issuance of the cash management bills or the ways and means advances. Now, for example, let's say in the month of October, the government of India is said to receive around rupees 100, but it is required to undertake an expenditure of rupees 150 for this entire month of October. Now, here the government of India is expecting that in the next month of November, it will get this additional amount of rupees 50. So now the government requires this amount of rupees 50 in order to address this temporary mismatch between receipt and expenditure. And in order to bridge this temporary mismatch, the government can go for issuance of either the cash management bills or the ways and means advances. The difference here is through the ways and means advances, the government is borrowing the money from the RBI, whereas through the issuance of the cash management bills, the government is borrowing money from the market. Apart from these four sources, the government of India also issues the special government securities such as the recapitalization bonds, sovereign gold bonds, and the securities against the National Small Savings Fund. Out of all of these components, it is the dated securities that account for the highest government's borrowings. As far as the external debt of India is concerned, presently it accounts for only 3% of India's GDP. This is much lower in comparison to 38% of India's GDP that is accounted by the internal debt. The external debt has basically two components, that is the loans from the multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc. And the second component is the bilateral debt, that is basically the loans which we are take from the other countries. Out of these two sources, as you can see here, the loans from the multilateral institutions account for 70% of external debt, whereas the bilateral debt accounts for only 30% of the external debt. Now coming to the liabilities under the public account of India, as you can see here, these liabilities are considered to be separate and they are not accounted under the public debt. The liabilities under the public account of India includes the National Small Savings Fund, the State Provident Fund, and other public deposits which are kept under the public account of India. As far as the National Small Savings Fund is concerned, I hope you must be aware that the government of India is operating a number of small savings schemes such as the post office deposits, public provident fund deposits, the senior citizen savings scheme, national savings certificate, Kisan Vikas Patra, and so on. So whatever money the government collects through these small savings schemes, all that money goes into a separate fund which is referred to as the National Small Savings Fund, and this is considered to be a liability under the public account of India. Now coming to the question that was asked in prelims 2019, the question here was, consider the following statements. Most of India's external debt is owed by the government entities. See here, based upon who is borrowing the money from the external sources, we have basically two types of debt, that is the sovereign debt and the non-sovereign debt. The sovereign debt is basically the money that is borrowed by the government of India, whereas the non-sovereign debt is a debt incurred by the private sector. In case of India, the non-sovereign debt, that is the loans incurred by the private sector, is much higher than the sovereign debt. So the first statement which is given here is wrong. The second statement reads as all of India's external debt is denominated in terms of US dollars. Even this statement here is wrong because India's external debt is denominated in terms of different currencies. So accordingly, if you look at the answer in this particular case would be D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Now the next article appears on page number 10 and is titled as the central government to release the Tur Dal to the states. Now we have picked up this particular article because in the prelims 2020, at least 2 to 3 questions have been asked with respect to this particular article. For example, there was a direct question related to the trends in the pulses production in India. Secondly, there was a question which required us to find out as to what factors have affected the prices of the agricultural commodities in the recent past. And thirdly, there was a question related to the procurement of the cereals as well as pulses. So let us understand the context of this particular article as well as the related information, and then we'll come back to solve the questions asked in the UPSC Prelims 2020. Now, if you look at the overall demand for the pulses within India, it is around 24 to 26 million tons on an annual basis. On the other hand, the production of pulses is quite lower and it is in the range of 17 to 23 million tons. So there is a mismatch between demand and supply. In order to address this particular mismatch between demand and supply, the Union Ministry for Consumer Affairs has decided to build a buffer stock of almost up to 1.6 million tons of pulses. Now, this particular buffer stock norms have been laid down based upon the recommendations of a committee headed by Mr. Ramesh Chand. Now, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, what has happened in case of India is there has been almost 20% increase in the prices of various pulses such as the Tur Dal, Urad Dal, etc. Now, this increase in the prices of pulses has basically taken place on account of increase in demand and lower production of pulses. Hence, in order to bring down the prices of pulses and make it more affordable for the consumers, the Ministry of Consumer Affairs has now decided to release almost up to 40,000 tons of the buffer stock of the pulses into the market. Now, release of these buffer stock will enhance the overall supply of the pulses and bring down their prices. Now, this clearly shows that the government's trading, that is the procurement of the commodities from the farmers, building up the buffer stock and then releasing the buffer stock into the market, has the capability to affect the price of the agricultural commodities in India. And as you can see, this was a direct option that was given in the UPSC Prelims 2020. So the release of the pulses from the buffer stock is expected to increase their supply in the market, reduce their prices, and thus make them more affordable for the poor people. In this regard, one also needs to be aware about the Price Stabilization Fund scheme. The Price Stabilization Fund scheme is a central sector scheme that is implemented by the Ministry of Consumer Affairs. This scheme was introduced in the year 2015 in order to protect the consumers from inflation in the agricultural commodities. Now, if you look at some of the agricultural commodities such as fruits, vegetables, pulses, etc., the prices of these agricultural commodities is highly volatile. A drastic increase in the prices of these agricultural commodities can make them unaffordable for the poor people. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, the government of India is implementing the Price Stabilization Fund scheme. Initially, the Price Stabilization Fund scheme covered only the onions and potatoes, and later on the pulses were also added. Under this particular scheme, basically the government or the government agencies undertake the procurement of these commodities from the farmers, build up the buffer stock, and as and when the prices of these agricultural commodities increases to a very high level, then the stock of these agricultural commodities are released from the buffer stock into the market, leading to increase in the supply and the reduction in their prices. As stated before, this scheme is implemented by the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, and the fund as such is managed by the Small Farmers Agri-Business Consortium. To the question that was asked in Prelims 2020, the question here was with reference to pulses production in India. Consider the following statements. The first statement was black gram can be cultivated as both Kharif and Rabi. Now the black gram here is referred to as the Urad Dal. This statement here is correct. The second statement reads as green gram alone accounts for nearly half of the pulses production. In case of India, we produce different types of pulses, that is a Bengal gram, that is chana, red gram, that is arhar, green gram, that is moong, black gram, that is urad, and so on. Now the overall production of the red gram, that is the tur dal, is much higher than that of the green gram. So you can eliminate this particular option. Now upon eliminating this particular option, the option that you will be left with will be A, and that is the right answer in this particular case. The second question was, which among the following factors or policies were affecting the price of the rice in India in the recent past? So the options were minimum support price, government's trading, government stockpiling, and consumer subsidies. The answer in this particular case would be D. You should note here that even the government's trading, that is buying of agriculture commodities, building up of the buffer stock, and then releasing the buffer stock into the market in order to reduce their prices, even that is a very important factor that affects the price of the agricultural commodities. The next question is, consider the following statement: in cases of all the cereals, pulses, and oilseeds, the procurement at the minimum support price is unlimited in any state or the Union Territory of India. This statement here is wrong. This is wrong mainly on two accounts. First and foremost, the procurement is not for all the cereals. The minimum support price is declared only for 22 major agricultural commodities and not for all the cereals. And secondly, you should note that there is a limit on the procurement of the pulses in India. This limit has been laid on under the Pradhan Mantri Annadata Sanrakshan Abhiyan. Now this is a screenshot of the guidelines issued under the price support scheme, which is a component of PM Asha. And as you can read here, there is a limit on the procurement of the commodities procured under the PM Asha, and this particular limit is 25% of the actual production of that particular commodity. So under PM Asha, only up to 25% of the harvested pulses and oilseeds can be procured in a single year. Apart from that, there is limit on purchase of these agriculture commodities from a farmer as well, wherein according to guidelines only 50 bags, that is one bag of 50 kg each, shall be purchased from one farmer in a single day. So that is why the first statement which is given here is wrong. The second statement reads, in case of cereals and pulses, the MSP is fixed in a state at a level to which the market price will never rise. See, the basic idea of fixing the MSP is that the MSP should act as a floor for the market price. That is, by declaring the minimum support price, the government of India signals as to what should be the market price, and ideally these market prices should be higher than the minimum support price. So obviously the second statement which is given here is wrong, and accordingly the right answer in this particular case would be D. That is neither 1 nor 2. The next article appears on page number 10 and is titled as Cabinet Approval for the School Education Reform Project. This article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection Current Affairs. Now recently the Union Cabinet has approved a new centrally sponsored scheme known as Strengthening Teacher Learning and Result for the States. This scheme is partly funded by the World Bank and is basically targeted in order to improve the learning outcomes. Now if you look at the gross enrollment ratio in case of primary education, this is more than 99% in case of India. However, one of the biggest problems which affects the education sector, particularly the primary education, is the poor learning outcomes. According to the annual status of education report that is published by the NGO Pratham, the school education outcomes in case of India is considered to be quite poor. Accordingly, this particular project basically seeks to improve the learning outcomes of the school children. Apart from that, this project also seeks to set up PARAK, which stands for Performance Assessment Review and Analysis of the Knowledge for the Holistic Development. This would be an independent and autonomous institution, and as the name suggests, this particular autonomous institution will lay down norms on the basis of which the students' performance would be judged. Presently, this particular project would cover 6 states, these states being Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Kerala and Odisha. With this, we have come to end of our discussion. Now the answers to the questions that were posed before the start of our discussion has been displayed on your screen. As far as the answer to the question 12, 13 and 14 is concerned, I would want you to find out yourself on your own and respond in the comments section. Now coming to the question for the day, the answers to the yesterday's question for the day is C, that is World Economic Forum.